Olá, seja bem-vindo às Carpintarias de São Lázaro, o Mês da Ciência e Educação 2022 da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. Começou com uma conversa muito interessante e algo controversa com um conceituado cientista norte-americano que argumentou que a crise climática não é assim tão extrema como pensamos e que há tempo para agir de forma mais ponderada e estratégica para combater as alterações que vivemos e sentimos. Hoje iremos continuar a abordar a saúde do planeta com Tea Törmänen, diretora executiva da RePlanet, uma ONG que procura as melhores soluções científicas e energéticas para inverter o impacto das alterações climáticas. Tea, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. And the first question I have for you is to explain exactly what RePlanet is, the priorities your organization has, and what is the work you have on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis in order to secure an impact in the work you're doing.
RePlanet is pro-human, pro-science environmentalist organization. We were registered in Belgium in February, so we're brand new, but we already have organizations across Europe and now even in Australia. How it got started was that I've been an environmentalist all my life, but me and many others got frustrated with the traditional NGOs for rejecting solutions and technologies, using argumentation, which I personally thought was very weak as a science nerd. So I felt like I didn't belong, but as an adult, I found people who thought the same way. And we believe that rejecting technologies like nuclear or genetic modification is like fighting environmental problems, one hand tied behind our backs. And we think we can't afford to do that. And we also believe that pointing out problems without offering any solutions, it's making people hopeless. And so we want to offer solutions provided by science. And we want to promote these solutions, and we want to be a positive NGO that is not about the doom and gloom. We also believe that poverty must be removed from the world. We think it's a human right to have a high quality life. And we think that our solutions cannot be based on keeping the poor as poor as they are now. So we think that we should be discussing energy poverty and things like that much more.
Okay, so that sets the stage for our conversation over the next 40 minutes or so, because we'll get into details of a lot of those topics and ideas that you brought up. I wanted to get stuck in to renewable energy, okay? I think it's pretty much understood and accepted by all the specialists and most people who are informed that burning fossil fuels is detrimental to the atmosphere and to the planet and to its future. So as far as renewable energy, how ambitious can we be in finding solutions that are both practical and affordable in the near future? Because I can tell you that for Portugal, this is also a very pertinent conversation, considering that we're so, there's so much potential here regarding solar and wind energy.
Yeah, first of all, I have to point out that I don't like the term renewable at all, and we should get rid of it. It's not very scientific nor well-defined, and we just seen a huge debate and a vote about biomass in the EU, which shows how problematic the term is, because renewable doesn't mean sustainable when it comes to emissions and environmental impacts. So I think we should be more technology neutral and discuss, for example, low-carbon energy sources. That said, I think wind, solar, and hydro will play a big role. But we also have to keep evaluating their environmental impacts to biodiversity, for example. I hope that the use of biomass will hopefully be very limited, and we kind of avoid burning it, and we'll use it for aviation fuels or other applications that are very difficult to do using other energy sources. Hydro is problematic for river ecosystems. And for example, in Finland, we've been getting rid of some of the smaller hydro plants to kind of restore these river ecosystems. So that must be taken into account as well. But it will be an important source of energy. And droughts in the future, because this is what climate change will do, we will have more droughts, and this will be problematic for hydro plants. They already are across the globe, so there are problems in Europe, problems in the United States as well, and this will only get worse. So we need other sources, energy sources as well. And solar is obviously a very good option for countries with a lot of sunshine, such as Portugal. But in Finland, it's completely different. So we have many months in the winter where we hardly have any sunlight. So obviously it will not help us during winter. Wind in Finland it's much better, so they can produce energy during winter as well. But variability with these sources like wind and solar is still a problem. We don't have the battery technology yet to kind of provide power when there's no wind. I mean, in Finland, there can be days with not much wind blowing, and it's very problematic in the winter when we need heating and so on. So I think all of them will play a big role, hydro, wind, and solar. But I think we need nuclear as well to have this low cost, reliable system. So I don't think we should look individually about like how like wind power can be very cheap, but then it can be really expensive at the system level if we need to invest in big batteries and so on. So we need to look at the system costs and what is the best and most reliable system.
Okay, we'll get into nuclear later, but just to get this right, you prefer the term sustainable energy rather than renewable energy, correct?
Yeah, sustainable, low carbon, or non-combustion. These are good terms, but renewable I don't like because it's not really well defined and it doesn't mean sustainable.
Just to get that clear. Help us paint a picture of the attitude and the perspective of different areas of the world when it comes to sustainable energy and the need or the urgency to do away with fossil fuels. I think it'd be fair to say that we look at Northern Europe as a very progressive and innovative part of the planet when it comes to these topics, but obviously it's different everywhere, right? So from your experience as a scientist and also as an environmentalist, can you give us that kind of snapshot of who's leading, who's following, and who's not interested?
So I mean, we have many countries that have a really clean electricity grid already, like Sweden, France. We have a really clean electricity grid in Finland as well, and it's getting even cleaner thanks to Olkiluoto 3 coming online. And then, I think a lot of countries are doing a lot, but then there's just because there are different situations in different countries and different places where they started from, then there's obviously countries like within Europe, like Poland or Estonia, who still have a lot to do to get rid of fossil fuels. And and especially in developing countries where they have to increase their energy consumption, they cannot decrease it because there are people using less electricity that our fridge is using in developed countries. We cannot tell them that, you have to decrease your energy consumption. They have to increase their energy consumption. So those countries, are in completely different situation.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you specifically about some of the big superpowers, because I think the attitude in the US may be a little bit different, and then you get into India, China, and countries that have such a large population. And we were speaking with an American scientist in the first episode of our show that told us, look, forget about India and China and even Brazil maybe, like they want to grow, and the cheap way to grow is with fossil fuels, and they're not going to get into this anytime soon. How do you react to these different areas of the world moving at different paces and having different priorities as well?
Yeah, I mean, we cannot force any other countries to do anything. And if you look at emission historically, I mean, it's the rich countries which have caused a lot more emissions historically than developing countries. So I think we kind of have to give them the chance to increase their level, their quality of life. And many of the countries, I think we should support in building this reliable energy system without relying a lot on fossil fuels. Of course, countries like China, they could afford doing a low carbon system themselves. There are many countries that we should support more building this. And right now we're not doing enough, I think. Because if we don't support them, then they will use fossil fuels. This is inevitable because they will not stay poor. They want the same quality of life that we already have. And so if we want them to do it without fossil fuels, then we must help them. I think in China, though, they do understand the problem and they are building a lot of low carbon sources as well. But like you said, the first priority is to that the people will have a high quality of life. So yeah, then for this we would need like international climate commitments and agreements. But right now they're not they have not built it in the way that it would encourage countries to reduce their emissions enough.
I wanted to get your take on natural gas because out of fossil fuels, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the one that is less harmful for the environment. But obviously there's so many geopolitical uncertainties here, and we've all learned that lesson the hard way with Russia. What's your opinion on this matter and of this choice of energy to help make the transition to a fully sustainable energy solution?
It's well, if you look at it that way, if you just count the emissions from when using it, it's the least harmful, but it doesn't take leaks into account, and this is actually a huge problem also in Europe. For example, Clean Air Task Force, they have a good plan for EU to tackle these leaks, but they're happening, and it's a huge problem. So usually these calculations don't take leaks into account, and that's a big problem. And methane is even more a greenhouse gas, even more effective than carbon, CO2. So I do think we need to get rid of gas ASAP as well. We at RePlanet we're against of bundling nuclear and gas together because gas is a fossil fuel and we need to get rid of that, and nuclear is not. I understand that in some countries like Poland, you might still need gas for longer, but especially in rich countries, we should be able to do this transition without gas. And I think maximizing the use of nuclear power would help us not to have a lot of gas. So for example, in Finland, we hardly use any gas, and that's mainly thanks to our nuclear fleet. So I think it's a choice that we have done in Europe, that we want to rely on gas, and as we can see now, it's a very problematic decision. Just because we shouldn't be dependent on nations like Russia or even other very questionable governments. There are not a lot of places where you can get gas, and it's not questionable at all. I think it's been a huge mistake, and we should avoid making it in the future. And so I don't think we should be, especially in rich countries, we shouldn't use it as a transitional energy source. We don't have time for that, to be honest. So we have no chance of meeting our climate goals if we keep on using it. A different thing in developing countries, like I said, they probably have to use it for a little bit longer. But like I said, we should support them in building this energy system without fossil fuels as much as we can.
Okay, so your position is clear regarding natural gas. I wanted to get into nuclear a little bit later, but since you've mentioned it now a few times, let's get into it now. What's the biggest misconception about nuclear energy in your view?
I think the biggest fear that people have is radiation. Radiation is a concept that not many people understand, and people are really bad at putting risks into like comparing risks and putting them into perspective. So they see like Godzilla movies and stuff like that, and I think the radiation is always like super bad, and they overestimate the risks when it comes to nuclear. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges with nuclear and nuclear waste as well. So we need to be able to explain the actual risks, and there are also risks involved with not using nuclear, and these are not discussed, or we don't compare the risk of nuclear for risks of not using nuclear, which is air pollution, not meeting climate goals, emission reduction goals. So there are risks, and we should be comparing them. And to me, like, the risk of nuclear waste is minuscule compared to the risk of climate change. Like, anything waste could cause is not even in the same category or same risk category than the risks associated with climate change. So these should be compared and explained to the general public, and that's what we're trying to do at RePlanet.
Yeah, and the data that I've seen is actually nuclear energy causes the same amount of death rate that, for example, for generating solar and wind energy. But I think traditionally, when we hear of nuclear, the first reaction is fear, right? Just because of the history of the planet, and you think of nuclear bombs and you think of radiation, as you said. Tell us, what are the ultimate advantages of nuclear energy, and who's doing it well? And I guess France will come up here, right?
I think Finland is doing even better.
Okay.
Our nuclear fleet is actually, well, at least at one point it was the most reliable in the world, and even now, like in recent years, the Loviisa plants, which are really old, like they're decades old already, they're still making new records in reliability. So we have been taking really good care of our nuclear plants, and I'm very proud of them. So we do well, and we also have the final repository for nuclear waste. So I think we're actually one of the model students when it comes to nuclear. And
So what did you do well that other countries could learn from? And how did the public accept nuclear energy when it may not accept it as easily in other areas of Europe or the planet?
Finland has always been like this engineering country, so we tend to rely on science and scientists and engineering, and we're very prone to adapting new technologies. And so, for example, when cell phones came around, Finns were very quickly took them on, and everyone had a cell phone in like few years. So we're very pro-technology, very pro-science. So I think that's one of the reasons. And nuclear has been very popular in Finland, but even in Finland it's now more popular than ever. So I think the energy crisis and the climate urgency has made people realize that we absolutely need this low-carbon energy source. The benefits are that it's reliable. So it's 24/7, it's very predictable. So for countries that have a lot of industry, like Finland, we have steel industry. We absolutely need this kind of baseload power so we can predict how much energy we're getting. And nuclear in Finland has been really reliable, and that's why we're thinking about building even more, for example, for district heating in Finland, because heating is one of the areas that we haven't solved yet. So we're still burning a lot of stuff for heat, and we would like to get rid of that as well.
Another objection that obviously I've read and you know of nuclear energy is the high cost that it takes to build the power plants and then to maintain them as well. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, in Europe, we have kind of messed this up. So we were able to make nuclear plants in a really fast pace. When Sweden was doing this, France was doing this, Finland was doing this. We did it so that we built several similar plants in a row. And now in Europe, we have switched to building first of a kinds. So plants that don't exist anywhere else. And we're building these huge projects, which are more prone to rising costs and so on. But still, even nowadays, there are reactors built in other places, not in Europe, but for example, in Baraka, the Arab Emirates. They had a really successful project building several similar nuclear plants, and the costs were lower, like for each plant. So this is normal. I mean, we build the same thing over and over again. It becomes cheaper. And this is something we have forgotten in Europe, but it's something we can still fix. In Finland, we just released this report about shipyard nuclear. So we're suggesting that we could build nuclear plants, floating nuclear plants in series in Finland's shipyards, and this would lower the costs for these plants. So that's what we need to do. We need to stop building these first of a kinds and start doing it the way we did it before, and that will help with the costs. But about maintaining nuclear plants, I don't think that it's that expensive. I've never heard this argument being used in Finland, so at least in my country, it doesn't seem to be very expensive. It will become expensive if you don't invest in it, and then the plants deteriorate because you're not doing maintenance on time, and then repairing this is probably expensive, but not if you take good care of them all the time, basically. So
yeah, gotcha. Obviously, the war has brought nuclear plants onto the agenda again, considering fighting that has happened around a nuclear plant in the Ukraine. Do you think that also hurt the reputation, maybe, of the safety of nuclear plants, considering that obviously it was associated to a war and a possible disaster there?
At least in Finland, it hasn't decreased the popularity of nuclear because I think people understand that it's a war situation. So many other things can be dangerous in a war situation, like chemical plants. If you attack a chemical plant, that's very dangerous as well. But we don't suggest that, okay, we'll get rid of all the chemical plants in case we end up in a war situation. So I don't think we can build our energy system in all the countries making this assumption that we'll be at war at any given time. Of course, the situation in Ukraine is very unfortunate, and it's horrible behavior from Russia, and they're actually breaking all the international laws by doing that. But yeah, I don't think it's really an argument against nuclear because again, it's a war situation, and it's very unfortunate, and we must do everything we can that to keep this nuclear plant operating the way it should be. But I don't think we should design our energy system thinking about ending up in war in the near future.
And extreme situations. Final question about nuclear before we move on. Let's say that you had an opportunity to meet with the Portuguese government and the Prime Minister and the President and the head of the Energy Association here. What would your pitch sound like for a country like ours to get involved in nuclear energy and to invest in nuclear energy in a nutshell?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was looking at our world in data about the Portuguese energy system, and it still seems that almost 70% of your primary energy comes from fossil fuels. So there's still a lot to go. Like people usually talk about electricity, but that's only a very small part of the energy that we use. So there's still heating, oil, like transportation, and all these things that we could use nuclear for. So there's plenty of decarbonizing to be done in Portugal as well. And looking at Estonia, our neighbor who doesn't have a nuclear fleet right now, they're still investing in SMRs. They have a really promising project going on in Estonia. So I would kind of make the connection to Estonians because it's a small country investing in small modular nuclear reactors to see if there's anything that Portugal could get from that and learn from them and understand why they decide to invest in nuclear, although they don't have that yet.
Okay. I wanted to move on to hydrogen and green hydrogen, which is the production of hydrogen utilizing sustainable energy, because I guess it's a very important conversation when it comes to transport, because we know that when it comes to vehicles, there's a big push in Europe towards electric cars. There's a lot of goals that have been set by the EU in order of restricting cars that use fossil fuel. But when it comes to large-scale transport, whether that's in shipping or in aviation, other solutions have to be found. And clean hydrogen has been utilized, and I think there's a movement towards utilizing it more. What's your view on this type of energy and the investment that can be done there?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely need it to get rid of fossil fuels. There are a lot of other alternatives. So we have lots of liquid fuels, fossil fuels to replace. We can electrify, like you said, cars, but then when it comes to aviation and ships and so on, it will be much more difficult to electrify those. We can electrify like planes that travel maybe 200 kilometers or something like that, but it's just, from continent to continent, it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible. So we do need hydrogen, absolutely. And we should invest in it. And we should be technology neutral about how we produce it. So it should be, so we should consider all clean alternatives and not just, for example, solar and wind, but nuclear as well. So we'll need a lot of hydrogen. And so we cannot fight this fight either with one hand behind our back. So I think we should use all the low carbon alternatives to produce it.
And obviously the goal here is that all these technologies can get together and eventually eliminate most, if not all, of CO2 emissions. Energy efficiency is a big part of this too, right? Tell us about what the world is still learning about energy efficiency and what it needs to focus on to make sure it's not only producing the right type of energy, but saving and keeping the energy to use at the right moments as well.
Yeah, energy efficiency is important, and it has improved. The problem has been a rebound effect. So that it means that when we kind of manage to save energy, then we use it more somewhere else. So this is hard to control for. So the steps we've taken in energy efficiency hasn't led to that much decrease in energy consumption. So that's the difficult thing. And also, if we look at the situation globally, like I said, there are many countries who need to increase their energy consumption. And how to limit the use of energy in a democratic society, I don't have an answer for that, and I haven't seen any feasible answers to that either from anyone else, and I'm happy to hear them if someone has them. But it's very difficult to limit the consumption of energy. We suggested right now, because of the Ukraine situation, that there would be kind of because we're in a war situation, then there could be some restrictions in place because of the war situation. But outside of this special kind of situation, it's very difficult and unpopular to restrict the use of energy. So energy efficiency is important and we should improve it. But I see too many people relying on that solely. So I think, no, we don't need nuclear. We don't need, let's just decrease our energy consumption. And then they don't understand how much we would actually have to decrease it to get rid of all the fossil fuels. So we need to be building a lot of clean energy, and we cannot stop doing that. So yeah, there's a role for energy efficiency, and it can be great, but we just have to kind of consider the rebound effect and the fact that in many countries people still need to increase their energy consumption, and they cannot decrease it at this point because they're not using that much right now, and they're in poverty because of that.
Look, and I think that a huge challenge for our planet is the fact that population will keep increasing, and population is also increasing in the developing world, right? Or in the underdeveloped world. So what solutions should we be looking at now when there are goals to meet? There are concrete objectives that are there. When you talk about the Paris Agreement, when you talk about climate milestones that we need to reach in order to protect our future, what's your view of this state of play at the moment when you look into the next 10, 20, 30 years?
Well, first of all, we need a lot of investment in these technologies. We do already have a lot of technologies that we can use, but they haven't scaled in a pace that we need them to scale. So we need to rapidly make investments so that we can scale these technologies that we already have and start start kind of building this in a very ambitious way. We need to start being technology neutral. We cannot afford to exclude any clean options. We must help the developing countries to build their energy systems without relying hugely on fossil fuels. I'm a proponent of carbon pricing, so I would love to see like an international agreement that like outside of EU that would have EU, China, and US to agree on some kind of carbon pricing system. So I think that would increase the solidarity and increase the willingness in countries to do these climate measures. Because if people think that some other people are not doing anything in some other countries, then that will decrease their motivation. So if we could get this international agreement with even some type of carbon pricing, then that would make people feel that we're on the same boat and everyone's doing something, everyone is paying for their emissions. So that would be like a new idea that is not in place yet to get this kind of agreement.
That's a good idea, and the hardest part is getting all these superpowers to agree, right? And then there's the political landscape that keeps changing, and we live in such a polarized world these days where, elections and we've seen it when it comes to decisions that are made, extreme decisions that are made when you talk about a Brexit, when we talk about the election of a Donald Trump as well, and those changes can also affect the strategy that these very influential nations have when it comes to energy and fossil fuels, right? What are the range of energies that really, and you talk about being technology neutral and energy neutral, from a political standpoint, what are the range of energies that the most influential and powerful countries need to look at from a long-term perspective rather than on a administration to administration level?
Yeah, if you talk about energy production methods, I do think it's going to be like nuclear, wind, solar, geothermal. Then there's other smaller options that wave energy and something like that, but the potential of those is so small compared to these that I think nuclear, solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal will be the ones. And then we can develop energy storage systems. Hydrogen is not a source of, it's not energy source, it's an energy storing method. So then we can use those to store if we produce extra energy on some days because of the variability of wind and solar, we can use that to store energy. But I think those will be the solutions in the next decades because we already have them. We don't have time to wait for fusion or anything like that. We must deploy the methods that we already have and which we know that are already working right now.
As far as RePlanet is concerned, it's a recent NGO. What are the biggest opportunities and challenges that you have as an NGO when it comes to engaging with the big players and the decision makers that you can tell us about?
The decision makers have actually been really interested because we're so unique. So they've never encountered an NGO that is both for plant-based diets, but also for genetic modified crops. They haven't seen an NGO who's very ambitious about climate goals, is pro-nuclear, but also pro-wind and solar. So we represent this kind of new type of thinking that they haven't seen before. We talk about precision fermentation and all these technical scientific solutions that we have. And we always, if we present a problem, we also present a plan and a solution. And this to decision makers is very lucrative because they can actually then suggest something. We offer them something they can suggest, they can promote. So, like I said, just complaining about the problems is very depressing, at least to me. And I've heard this from other fellow environmentalists as well. So if you just kind of mull in the whole, like this horrific situation that we're in, then that will make you depressed and lethargic and you don't want to do anything anymore. But when you actively try to come up with solutions and figure out how we can actually do this, it gives you hope and it gives you energy. So we've been actually really successful in contacting and getting meetings with the MEPs for such a young organization, because we represent this new kind of fresh thinking.
And I believe I'm correct in saying that a priority for your organization as well is the quality of life and resources that people have moving forward. Yes. Tell us about what message you are spreading when it comes to helping to assure that in the near future, with the increased population and maybe more limited resources, people can have when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to crops and agriculture.
Yeah, so we have this new campaign coming up called Reboot Food, where we kind of describe our plan to feed the whole world at a reasonable cost, but so that everyone can have access to low-cost proteins and fat, lipids, and everything that we need. So this involves new breeding techniques, utilizing them, using precision fermentation, so we can actually do this without using all the land that we have. So land sparing is one of our key things, because that leaves room for nature. We cannot be using all the land because biodiversity loss is one of our biggest problems. But using the best available tools that we have, thanks to science, we can feed the world. But we need to be really efficient, really smart about how we produce food, and we cannot exclude any technologies just because we find them scary or we don't like them, or we would rather we'd rather have this romantic, idea about growing our food in our backyards, when in fact this is not scalable to the population levels that we have now. So if we go back in time and choose these inefficient methods, then we're definitely not able to feed the people we have in the future without using all the land that we have, and then we don't have any room for nature. So that's why in our slogan we have liberate nature and elevate humanity, because we want to give nature the room that it needs, the biodiversity, but we also want people to have food and, not starve. So that's why we need the technologies.
And how do you guarantee that these campaigns have an impact and that they can drive the change that you're proposing?
We're directing these campaigns towards general public to educate them. Because right now people really don't have an opinion about many of these new technologies. Many people haven't even heard about precision fermentation or many of these technologies. So we want to educate the public, but we want to talk to politicians because they are the ones deciding on these things. So it's very important. So we're approaching all the people. We're collaborating with different organizations as well. And hopefully, by contacting all the right people, doing the legislation at the right time, because right now, for example, they're renewing some of the legislation at the EU level when it comes to these genetically modified plants, then contacting the right people at the right time is the way that we ensure that the change will actually happen. And then we need to mobilize a lot of people in Europe and in other countries as well to speak up. So, for example, when it comes to nuclear energy, the opponents are actually a very small minority in many countries, but they're extremely vocal. So we need the supporters of nuclear energy to become as vocal as well, to make sure that the decision makers understand that there's a huge support for these technologies in the general public. They're just not aware. And so this is one of the tasks that we have, is to mobilize the general public and make our voice heard everywhere.
Finally, Terha, I wanted to ask you to share the message that I guess you are sharing with the partners and governments and the big companies that really can make a difference on the short term, which is what we're talking about here. What message do you send out regarding climate change and how quickly and efficiently the human race has to act as a whole to make sure that we have the ability to keep habitating this planet for centuries to come?
we need to act now, and I want to appeal to everyone that we would stop this fight between energy sources. Let's stop fighting within the low carbon energy sources, and let's focus on getting rid of fossil fuels, because that's the real fight. And as long as we keep fighting with each other within the environmental movement, they will win. So we need to stop all these shenanigans and just focus on getting all the low carbon solutions out there as quickly as we can. And the time is now. We have no time to waste on transitional fuels or anything like that. We already have the low carbon source methods that we need. We just need to scale them up. So we need to make legislation to make sure that we have enough investments. We need to be technology neutral. We need to move fast. So that's my message.
I think it's loud. I think it's clear. Thea, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on our program. And it's been fantastic to get an opportunity to hear your insight and expertise when it comes to scientific and sustainable solutions for the future of our planet, especially in the energy landscape. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Foi prazer falar com a Tea Törmänen, diretora executiva da ONG RePlanet, que tenta encontrar soluções científicas e sustentáveis para combater as alterações climáticas. Penso que ficou clara a mensagem dela relativamente à necessidade de ter um investimento em conjunto e colaborativo entre todas as entidades que trabalham e protegem as energias sustentáveis. E ficou aqui, obviamente, um apoio muito claro relativamente à energia nuclear também, como uma solução que devia ser apoiada para combater os combustíveis fósseis. Fica aqui mais um programa da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos, neste mês da Ciência e Educação. Até breve.